And they've done 100 houses, I think Pitt has announced, and they, just did a $10 million fundraiser, tried to build more, but these aren't plans. To say that that's a model for Springfield, I mean, I don't know what kind of movie star you can get in here. They funded part of this by having Angelina do this thing where she came out of a pit looking like she had no clothes on, and all the profits of that, I forget, what was that movie, Werewolf or something? Nobody saw it, but if they're good profits, it was going to help us rebuild the lower Ninth Ward. So even my feminist partner said, well, okay, the girl's got to do what she's got to do. But this is not a viable, sustainable rebuilding plan. Why you'd put it in another city's official plan as a suggestion for what you might do? I mean, it just goes to show you, even in this highly connected internet age, that you can just go, from down one part of the river in New Orleans to up another part here in Western Mass, and you can still tell the biggest whoppers you ever wanted to, and nobody will ever measure the fish. And that's just not the way you can rebuild. But before I just keep, sometimes I just have to turn the dial back. You can get out of control talking about rebuilding something like New Orleans, and don't get me started. What I'd like to do now is in fact see more what's on people's minds. I've heard the question about the lower Ninth Ward. I've heard some of the others on this side of the room, but how we want to roll, whatever's on your mind. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the things, and I was thinking about what you're talking about the planning process, but one of the things that in addition or parallel to the planning process they did here, and this is so it has some relation to the connection with the landlord thing, but the city went after the tornado and brought civil complaints against, I think it was 600 property owners for being guilty of having been hit by the tornado. And brought them to court, got orders to repair, brought it with a petition to have the court order them to repair or demolish their house within 24 hours. And escrow all insurance proceeds and ban them from accessing the property in any way. We were surveying houses for the historic preservation program at UMass. We saw a guy get arrested for trying to board up his house pursuant to a court order. And because they had this, everybody out. And as you point, talking about people being close, there's families, with this Hill Homes thing that we're trying to work on. 36 families are still out of 46. Some of them are as far away as 2 counties. Mm-hmm. Not San Antonio, but
yeah, I got you.
What I'm wondering is, in your work in New Orleans, did they, in effect, pursue anybody that's house was in any way damaged as for code violations and try to run around and demolish everything inside?
Well, that was the first huge campaign, and what we did, what caught huge fire was we ended up, it was a simple thing, that these signs, no bulldozing, which literally people were driving in every weekend. We couldn't keep the stacks in front of our building filled enough because people would come by to get a sign to put in front of their house, whether it was Fats Domino, when George Bush came at the first anniversary, if you looked at the New York Times picture, there's George Bush in front of Fats Domino's house, who's the iconic, Walking to New Orleans singer back in that day, with 2 ACORN no bulldozing signs behind them. But the key that we had to do is, here's how it works. If FEMA, any house that's destroyed, if it's more than 50% damaged, can't be rebuilt. It has to be rebuilt from scratch. It can't be rehabilitated. So the key for us was how quickly we could, what's called gut out the house. So we could strip it out, get the sheetrock out, so they could dry, essentially take it down to the studs so that it could dry out. As soon as you did that, you were, less than 50% damage. If you didn't do that, obviously the code violations, and they did all the same things. They wanted to put signs out and across all neighborhoods. But we ended up doing more than 5,000 houses just through ACORN. largely through volunteers. Obviously, it also cost us millions of dollars, to try to make sure people could be allowed to rebuild. And this is part of what the pushback was, because originally the whole thing was, we're just gonna bring bulldozers through and every house that's been damaged, and anything we call damage, tree down, whatever, a wall leaning, we're gonna take it down. And because nobody was around, I mean, it took me 54 days to get back to New Orleans myself. I mean, so it was just everybody in the lower Ninth Ward. It was not until 3 months after the storm the National Guard would even let people in to inspect their property to see if they could find old pictures or heirlooms or anything else. They couldn't. They were armed guards. And you know, where I live is across the street from what was a high school called Frederick Douglass at that time. Now it's one of those KIPP charter schools. And it was a bivouac area for the National Guard. So when we first came back, it was all military. I mean, so you had the police were National Guard and state police. I mean, it was all a militarized zone. So what you're saying was a big time problem. And the only way you could stop it was to physically stop it and to organize people aggressively to make sure that was done. And the newspaper in our city is a Newhouse newspaper. I don't know who owns yours.
Newhouse.
Sorry about that. I hope you're not counting on a daily paper in the future. Because we just found out last week we're not going to have one very long. But so the newspaper actually tried to campaign against us and argued that somehow we were putting too much pressure on building inspectors to approve the fact that the house was not more than 50% damaged. Well, we brought Cornell and a number of other university partners in to help us, who'd also inspected the house and determined, you know, what the chances in each property in the whole Ninth Ward were rebuilding, and 85% of them were totally able to be rehabbed. But the second thing we were able to do that you know, they didn't like is that when FEMA then checked back on us, they in fact agreed, contrary to the newspaper's argument, that yeah, the house could, you know, was not 50% damaged, and that meant you didn't have to raise it, you didn't have to go 8 foot high or whatever the new FEMA standards were to elevate. So you can go into some neighborhoods, like you were talking about the 8th Ward or Gentilly or those areas, where you can almost see who got gutted and who didn't. You'll all of a sudden be driving on New Orleans is flat as a pancake, as you may know. But you'll be driving down, all of a sudden you have a house that's street level, slab built. You have another house that's up 12 feet. So all of a sudden you have these huge 2-3 story houses next to these regular, you know, brick or frame bungalows, and it all depended on who moved more quickly to establish that you could rebuild. But I think that is the common tactic, and you know, you can read what happened in Alabama after that, where they wouldn't allow people. They did the same thing as New Orleans and some of these communities outside Birmingham. They wouldn't allow people to come back. They brought bulldozers in first. I think it's just a scandal. But it's a scandal that's based on inequity. I mean, the one thing that is true in this country is you have property rights. So to the degree a disaster can be used to reduce perhaps your only fundamental right we have in the United States is the right to own property. Voting turns out not to matter. A whole lot of things don't matter, but property rights still, as long as there's this is important to corporations, they're pretty much a trump card.
But the town's doing here is saying that the police power trumps property rights, and they're wildly exaggerating the level of work needed, probably by a factor of 3 or 4, in order to claim. Haven't heard them say use a 50% standard.
But that's a FEMA standard. They don't have anything to say about that in Springfield.